All right, so Grace, your keynote session will be approximately 45 minutes long, and we'll have time for audience questions after that. So whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and begin your keynote.
Awesome, thank you. Let me pull up screen sharing. Okay, is that working?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Hello, thanks for your attendance. Thank you to the STEM Librarians Collaborative Planning Committee for putting on this event and for the opportunity to participate. I'm really excited to be here. And hello to fellow West Coast folks for whom it is also 8 a.m. So if you're still drinking coffee, me too. And yeah, my name is Grace Scalinder. I am the science librarian at San Jose State University, part of the CSU system in California. My role is primarily that of a liaison librarian. I support departments from within our College of Science. I'm pretty new to SJSU. I started here about 8 months ago. Prior to that, I was a reference and instruction librarian supporting the College of Engineering at California State University, Northridge. And in April of this year, I joined my SJSU library colleagues, Adriana Poe and Dawn Hackman, in putting on a data hackathon as part of our programming for National Public Health Week in collaboration with SJSU's Department of Public Health. And at the time, I'd only been in my role for about a month, so I was still very much in the onboarding phase of things. So the project quickly turned into a crash course on issues surrounding data disappearance and its preservation, practical steps for collaborative campus programming, and everything in between. So basically for this presentation, I'm just going to walk through that process and the things that I learned along the way. So I hope that no matter where you're at in your librarianship career, you'll find something to take away, whether it's an idea, a strategy, or even just the inspiration to hold a similar event on your own campus. So before I jump into it, here's just a brief look at the agenda. I've divided the presentation into 5 sections. Background kind of on the issue of disappearing data, planning a hackathon, the process of it, results and challenges, and then just kind of my perspective on everything as a newer librarian. I can also, I'll do that before I forget. I'll put the links to the slides in the chat because there's a lot of links linked to my slides. So feel free to access those if you want to click on any of the resources out of it or anything. Don't go too far ahead because spoilers. Okay, so first section, background on disappearing data. As many of us in information professions are aware, the government has long been a source of reliable, transparent, open access data on a wide variety of topics. In many ways, it is its own form of public infrastructure. This data guides decisions made by policymakers, researchers, educators, and scientists that impact all of us. It's easy to access sometimes. It's trustworthy and often one of the first places we point students and faculty when they're looking for data to support their projects and research. I, for one, was always taught that any data from a .gov website was automatically trustworthy, and I never questioned that someday I might not be able to blindly pass that along. Before I was a librarian, I was a teaching associate in the digital humanities department at UCLA, and every quarter my students would get into groups and build toward a final project in which they use data to tell both a visual and written narrative. It could be on literally any topic. The only caveat is that the topic had to be data-driven. And it had to use pre-existing data, so they weren't going out and collecting data themselves. An overwhelming majority of them ended up reliant on government data, either as their primary data set or supplementary data to support their points. These projects were on everything from climate change to representation in the arts to civic engagement to immigration to K-pop stan Twitter, and a lot of topics in between. The thread that they all shared is that they were human-centered, and they were all able to take those numbers from the spreadsheet and turn them into stories. They were able to draw out inferences about the people, communities, infrastructures, and environments that make up the United States and draw some really powerful and critical conclusions. So I say this just to illustrate one of the many ways in which government data is foundational to so many variations of the research process. And the following slides just kind of illustrate a few like broad stroke categories of government data, as well as the many agencies that collect and produce it. Of course, this is all non-exhaustive, but hopefully it's just kind of helpful to visually see how many agencies, small and large, produce data that impacts us. You've got demographic data coming out of places like, of course, the Census Bureau, labor statistics, health statistics, Homeland Security's Office of Immigration statistics, Social Security, economic data, again, economic analysis, labor statistics, Federal Reserve, Department of the Treasury, social data, health statistics, education statistics, justice statistics, Department of Housing and Urban Development, environmental data, of course, is the EPA, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, US Geological Survey, NASA, Department of Ag, spending data, Office of Management and Budget, Department of the Treasury, Government Accountability, Congressional Budget, Inspector General offices. So just kind of a lot of different things that some of these may be day-to-day interactions for some of us, some less frequent, but yeah, all just touching on really broad range of things that impact us daily. And political transitions have long signaled changes to the data we access. Typically, turnover from one administration to another will include some change to publicly available government data. Heads of many government agencies are political appointments, and sites will reflect the priorities of the current administration. One thing that can be interesting to do is use the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to compare web pages between administrations. You can do it with tons of pages that connect to government data, but just as kind of like a small example here, I have a snapshot of the Census Bureau's data portal from the end of Obama's presidency and the beginning of Trump's first presidency. See if I can actually just click on it right now. It'll stay screen sharing. Or if it loads. Okay, yes. So snapshot of this website from towards the end of Obama's presidency. This is just like the data portal for the Census Bureau website. You can see there's kind of like the highlighted news. You've got differences between urban and rural populations. Americans moving at historically low rates, so kind of connecting to initiatives around like health. By comparison, beginning of Trump's first presidency, like a year-ish later, same link. Highlighted news, got population estimates show aging across race groups differs, and report on men's fertility. So, you know, do with that what you will, but I think it's just kind of interesting to see on sites like it, how priorities change and are reflected. So that's kind of like, you know, typical transition. But then there's 2025. And the most recent administrative handover from Biden's presidency to Trump's second presidency. Here on this slide, you can see just a handful of headlines from kind of across the past year that illustrate how this time was pretty different. So I'll read these out. The Trump administration is disappearing our data to our detriment from MSNBC. Government data is disappearing before our eyes from The Hill. Scientists calls the disappearance of federal health data a digital book burning from NPR. Trump is deleting the data that keeps this country running from Slate. So essentially, almost immediately after Trump took office, data sets began vanishing from government websites altogether, not just changing tone or presentation, vanishing. The missing data primarily represents topics of attack by the administration agenda, such as DEIA, climate, health, international aid, and it moved pretty fast. In only February of 2025, the New York Times reported that at least 8,000 web pages had been removed. Site warnings were put up regarding anything to do with quote unquote gender ideology, and many agencies received lists of words that were forbidden from being used in their articles. Sites and dashboards like the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, National Institute of Health's Ending Structural Racism, Women's Health Equity and Inclusion, all removed without warning. So on this slide, I have just a couple resources that I think are interesting to go through if looking for more information, kind of like overview of what happened and is disappearing. Specifically, this Wikipedia page provides a pretty good kind of like overview of what's been taken out. Again, emphasizing this targeted focus on science, healthcare, and diversity. There's also GovDiff, which was built by Tufts students, Ben Borgers and Jerome Paulos. Kind of like what I just did in the Wayback Machine, comparing pages between administrations. This site kind of automatically runs that comparison, but specifically applying to the current administration. So it'd be cool to check out if you would like. And then, well, there was definitely like a huge initial push to erase data that didn't immediately conform to the newly laid out priorities. Continued threats stand to extend even into the way government agencies collect data, let alone what they do with existing data. So some executive orders that impact ongoing data collection include Executive Order 14168, Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. This one removes gender identity options such as transgender and non-binary from many government-issued surveys. Executive Order 14151, Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing, eliminates wording using common DEI language or the phrase DEI. And Executive Order 14148, Initial Rescissions of Harmful Executive Orders and Actions, which removes questions on civil rights, discrimination, sexual orientation, and environmental justice. And then at the bottom of this slide, I've linked a LibGuide that was created by my SJSU colleague, Adriana Poe, which includes more information about these executive orders and also lists of specific agencies and surveys that they impact. So if you want to check that out, that's there. And the recent government shutdown also has an impact on publicly available data. In many cases, the shutdown caused suspension of data collection and publication across various agencies. For one example, the team at the Bureau of Labor Statistics that produces inflation estimates that drive the annual cost of living adjustment for Social Security is entirely benched, as per MSNBC. Connected is the slashing of jobs in these agencies that collect and drive data output. CDC, NOAA, many others now facing critical staffing shortages without proper infrastructure, even beyond administration mandates on what type of data they are allowed to collect. They are simply unable to collect data at all. So that was kind of doom and gloom, which of course begs the question, what can we do about it? Action is being taken by many across a lot of spheres. Librarians and researchers are mobilizing on college campuses. Groups of researchers coming out of places like Harvard School of Public Health have formed committees and action groups that work to scrape and preserve data as quickly as possible. The Data Rescue Project, which some of you may be aware of, does really foundational work in terms of data preservation, and we're able to quickly mobilize in response to the crisis. They have a ton of great resources, some of which I will be bringing up later on. They also actively host hackathons themselves that you can attend. I think the most recent one was last week. Internet Archive, of course, has a long history of capturing and preserving web pages at moments in time, and again, is a great general resource to point students, faculty, anyone who might be accessing government data for their research and wondering, wait, this page used to be here, where did it go? Towards. End of Term Web Archive is actually fully dedicated to capturing and saving US government websites at the end of presidential administrations. They utilize the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine as one of their tools. And the Data Liberation Project is an initiative to identify, obtain, reformat, clean, document, publish, and disseminate government data sets of public interest. They primarily do work with making obscured or inaccessible data available to the public. And even more specifically, what can you do? Well, the common thread of advice is if you see something, save something. A saying that I did not make up, but unfortunately I was unable to track down the exact origin of. I believe it was Internet Archive, which, speaking of Internet Archive, is probably the easiest thing you can do. If you happen to be on a government webpage with government data, you can toss it in the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to capture it as is. This can help track changes and could even potentially be a last remaining source of something if it gets fundamentally altered or removed altogether. But as librarians and educators, there are other ways we can utilize available resources and get the library and campus involved with you. Raise awareness, educate about disappearing data, host a hackathon, which we will be hearing more about in a second. But before we move on from this section, I also just wanted to highlight a couple more resources that you can use for further reading or recommendations later, specifically some amazing LibGuides that other universities have put together on this topic. University of Minnesota, UC San Diego, American University have all developed LibGuides that I've gotten a lot of great information from, so highly recommend checking them out. So, back to the question of, in the face of pretty overwhelming odds, what can we do about it? This was the question that some San Jose State librarians were asking at the same time as we were gearing up to celebrate National Public Health Week. And since the most tangible way of mobilizing and helping is to actually go and save data, we thought it would be prudent to organize a hackathon. And really quickly, before I get into our planning process, I just wanted to clarify what I mean when I say saving or rescuing data. The goal is just to get it off the government site and saved somewhere else. Basically, it's just this idea that by grabbing this publicly available data and storing it in repositories beyond government control, we can make sure it lives on and is available to researchers, even if this or any administration decides to remove it. It also ties into the LOCKSS principle of digital preservation. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. So, in order to expand the scope of the program beyond just the library, it helps to identify stakeholders, people on campus who would benefit from or be interested in joining in a project like this. Something I've learned in general through liaison librarianship is that really all you need is just one professor that cares, just one, and then you can leverage them to heck and back. But lots of different departments and groups on campus should care about the issue of disappearing data, as lots of different researchers depend on this data. Just a few of the obvious ones include public health, earth, climate, environmental science, sociology, medical or biomedical science, economics. In addition to finding stakeholders on campus, it can be helpful to fold the event into pre-existing celebrations that connect in order to maximize visibility and participation. For a hackathon centered around preserving public data, and because I was working with 2 health science librarians, we had the hackathon as part of our campus's celebration of National Public Health Week, which occurs every April as defined by the American Public Health Association. There were a variety of events going on for National Public Health Week at SJSU, some of which were planned and hosted by the library, others by various departments and student groups around campus. This helped boost our marketing of the event and made collaboration a default since we were already working with an interdepartmental committee of organizers. So if it wasn't already on your radar, the 2026 dates for National Public Health Week are April 6 through 12. Will be something to start thinking about. I just wanted to make a note that aside from National Public Health Week, there are a few other upcoming kind of umbrella opportunities that could connect to efforts around access to data. One is International Love Data Week coming up soon from February 9 to 13, 2026. I know a lot of campuses are probably already planning for that and gearing up to celebrate. Love data, perfect tie-in for events to raise awareness about disappearing data. Another is Banned Books Week. This one just happened last month, happening again in October of 2026. Banned Books Week, of course, focuses mostly on books, but I think anything that includes issues about censorship or access to information could definitely tie in. And then finally, World Digital Preservation Day. Just missed that one, first Thursday in November, but is another one with really strong connection to preserving access to government data. So back to our event, since we were working under National Public Health Week, we specifically partnered with SJSU's Department of Public Health and Recreation. This work was spearheaded by my colleagues and SJSU's Health Sciences librarians, Adriana Poe and Dawn Hackman, who brought me in my capacity as science librarian when I was first starting out. One of our main partners in this work was Professor Miranda Worthen from the Public Health Department. And we also had help in the planning process from several students, particularly from SJSU's public health peer ambassadors. I think getting student orgs involved in putting on events like this is so awesome for a number of reasons. One, they might have the energy and capacity where potential faculty collaborators don't. They have strong networks of peers who can both help and participate. And it's just a valuable learning experience for them, especially when the project connects to their own studies, research, or career interests. In a similar vein, our target audience for the event was students. We left it open to everyone, and our ultimate group of attendees did end up being a mix of students, faculty, and wonderful library colleagues who came to support. But we really wanted to frame this as a call to action that students could respond to and engage in. Plus, we wanted as many people out saving data as possible. And unlike any other demographic, students can be lured in with extra credit and catering. So with this angle in mind, we wanted to plan an event that would be relevant, engaging, and provide practical takeaways. Really, the goal was to get students thinking and engaging civically in potentially a new way, as well as make a tangible impact. In the planning and design process, it was helpful to think about the potential disparity in knowledge coming in. For many students, this might be their first time hearing about disappearing data, and for some, this might even be their first time consciously interacting with data. Contrary to perceptions outside our field, a lot of what we do can brush into the very technical, especially as STEM librarians. We wanted to be careful to balance educating on the issue in a digestible way with laying out those tangible, reproducible steps that isn't going to go over their heads. So we did end up spending the first several minutes of the event just kind of going into some background on data disappearance, not unsimilar to the first part of my presentation right now. But we also spent some time just defining basic data concepts and trying to address those potentially varying degrees of familiarity. So what did the event actually look like? We held the hackathon over 2 hours in our library's Digital Humanities Center. We sent out an RSVP form as part of National Public Health Week marketing and distributed the flyer you're currently viewing as part of the promotional materials. As I just mentioned, target audience was students, but we made it clear that anyone from the campus community who wanted to come in and help save data was welcome to join us. In the RSVP and promotional materials, we stated that it was drop-in, so there was no pressure to stay the whole time. We asked that participants bring their own laptop since we were not in a computer lab and attendees would need a device that could support downloading and moving data sets. We also had the aforementioned pizza as encouragement and bait. But again, while the event was drop-in, we thought it'd be important to spend some time addressing the fact that participants might have varied levels of awareness on the issue or technical know-how. So we spent that initial time building up a base level of awareness and understanding so we're all on the same page. And then we actually got into saving some data. So in the next couple slides, I've kind of outlined the practical steps each participant was walked through or expected to complete. We got the steps from the Data Rescue Project, who have this incredible toolkit that includes lesson plans, slides, resources, materials. So the following steps of our process are adapted out of those. It's just kind of how we implemented them in our specific hackathon. And then linked at the bottom of this slide is the LibGuide we made for the event. It is specific to the event that we had. It's not a general resource guides like some of the much more comprehensive ones I had linked previously. We just had so much going on the day of that we thought it'd be easier if attendees had somewhere to come to access all of the links and resources we were constantly referencing. and using and directing them to during the event. So the first step is to actually choose a data set. The Data Rescue Project has an ongoing tracker that keeps tabs on data that has already been rescued and reported in. So then you can focus your attention on data that may not yet have been preserved, as well as perhaps data that you may personally know about or have a vested interest in as it connects to your research or your department, et cetera. The one thing to keep in mind when choosing data and to emphasize to any participants is to make sure the data you choose is open access. Some data, especially data that might contain sensitive information about human subjects, would require a data use agreement upon accessing that would restrict sharing or duplication. So just keeping that in mind. But for our hackathon, we decided to actually pre-select data for the participants, particularly because we knew we were going to have a lot of students. So we wanted to make the process like streamlined and straightforward just to get through that learning curve. And then afterwards, if they felt comfortable and wanted to go get involved on their own and expand, then awesome, but just to start out. So we ended up choosing to focus on demographic data from the National Center for Veterans Analysis and Statistics from the most recently available year, which was 2023, for a couple reasons. One is that we tested it and it was pretty straightforward to download. It came out cleanly as a CSV file straight off the website, which is what you need to eventually upload. And we didn't want to have to spend time worrying about converting files or working in Excel or anything like that. Second is that it was easy to delegate and we didn't want to accidentally have overlap within the event. So it was pretty easy just to have everyone claim states and then keep track on the shared spreadsheet. And then third, it had a direct connection to the event theme of public health. A lot of the students were public health majors, so they were pretty easily and tangibly able to make a connection to the data, which included demographic statistics like age, race, gender, details on health facilities within the state to their own studies and research. Next, everyone downloaded their chosen data. The catch here is just to make sure that you're downloading every available file because the information might be spread across multiple files. In our case, the NCVAS data had a different sub-data set for each demographic category within a given state, and each category had like a long and short version of each data set. It's important to grab everything because you never know what a future researcher may be interested in or need, so just good to cover bases. And also be sure to grab any data definitions or data dictionaries that may accompany the raw data. Some data sets may include acronyms, jargon, or shorthand that is specific to that data set, and will include metadata documentation that defines the different variables and adds context to the structure. In the data we were working with, each state had a PDF document that included some of those elements and a summary of content, so we had to make sure participants were grabbing those as well. And then from there, just make sure that the files are organized and follow a clear standard naming convention before compressing them into a zip file. Pictured on the screen is just a screenshot of one of my folders for all the states I was helping with. And then, yeah, once there's a lot of files because there's a lot of different demographic categories, and then they all got compressed. And then the next part is to create an account with DataLumos. DataLumos is a sub-repository of ICPSR, or Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, which is a project based out of the University of Michigan. It specifically focuses on archiving US government data. It's totally free to create an account. You could link it to like your ORCID, but also something as simple as an email address works. And then your account gets created in the form of an ICPSR researcher passport. And their archive is searchable, so you can double check you're not uploading something that's already there. But it also doubles as a resource for researchers to use in the event that someone is looking for government data and having trouble finding it if it's already vanished. So for our hackathon, all participants created accounts with DataLumos. And then with that, the last step is to upload and publish. Once you're in DataLumos, you can create a new project and upload your files. Just be sure to enter any available metadata to enhance the searchability and coherency of future access, and then you can publish the project. So in the next section, I'm going to briefly go over some of the results of the hackathon, some of the challenges we faced, and things I've identified as possible solutions to address those challenges. So not that success is at all measured in numbers, but just to show a couple of stats and photos from the event. Here you can see our hackers hard at work in the DHC. Across the event, we had 28 participants, which is not bad considering we were asking people to come in, learn, and implement a new skill in 2 hours or less. And we rescued over 50 data sets. We managed to grab each of the 50 states for the NCVAS data plus DC. And I believe some participants who got the hang of it kind of went off on their own and started contributing into other areas, which is exciting. So all in all, given the challenges that I'll get to in a second, we were pretty happy with how it went. But yes, the process was not without its challenges. One was the sense of working within a time-sensitive grassroots movement. While organizations like the Data Rescue Project, Internet Archive, many others are leading the charge, it's not like there is one centralized default or designated body to steer everything. Because in many ways it is an unprecedented, rapidly developing situation, so many organizers have to operate on their toes, which inevitably trickles down to any response movement. And it's especially compounded by the time sensitivity of the issue, which I think felt even more urgent closer to the beginning of the year when there was that like initial wave of disappearances, but no less critical now because data is disappearing, and once it's gone, there's no guarantee it's going to come back. And then another challenge was this idea of becoming the expert. Again, connecting to this idea of uncharted territory, there was this kind of strange sense of being both facilitators and participants in our own workshop. While the skills gained from librarianship cross over into a lot of elements of this topic, none of us librarians involved in putting on this event had like formal expertise in the subject area. So we were learning and doing at the same time, which made for some trial and error. And another challenge was working with different levels of student knowledge. We didn't ask for any sort of prior knowledge coming in, which meant the students were at all different levels. At the beginning, I screen shared my computer and we all did like a very slow step-by-step walkthrough together. And then after that, everyone was kind of like released to work at their own pace. But you know, that model essentially kind of comes into conflict with a drop-in situation, which is also what we had going on. So that was something we weren't able to quite work out. And then there were some students who were like visibly interacting with these topics for the very first time. And it was, you know, evident that they probably could have benefited from a lot more foundational knowledge that we just didn't have time within the event to build. And then on the flip side, there were some students who were almost bored with our pace. At one point, I was doing something on screen share and it was taking forever. And a student raises their hand and says, you know, there's a shortcut for that. And I was like, no, I did not know that, but I do now. So, you know, for every challenge, there is, if not a solution, at least an opportunity. For the first challenge of this time sensitivity grassroots movement, I think the best anyone can do is to stay on top of communication in the best capacity that they can. Joining mailing lists, following relevant organizers on any professional media channels, communicating with colleagues both in and out of your organization. With becoming the expert, I think that's something every professional can struggle with at points, but I also think that fear should not prevent us from trying to do what we can, especially in situations like this where there's a need and an urgency. You know, acknowledge any limitations, but also acknowledge that your contributions and effort matter, even without needing to be like the most foremost expert on a topic. And in terms of student experience and engagement, while we tried to do this in the moment and were, you know, reasonably successful, something I would emphasize if I did this event again would be trying to shuffle participants into more concrete groups based on skill level. As it was, we had the facilitators kind of floating around to help troubleshoot or catch up newcomers, but everyone was still very much like one big group. And having someone sit down with anyone who felt like they were struggling and just go through it from the top again might have been helpful, or even asking those who were confident and bored to join in the facilitating and try to help their peers might have been interesting to try. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, I am fairly new to librarianship. I've been in my current position for less than a year, and I've been a professional librarian in total for a little over 2 years. So my perspective on the event was definitely a little different, and not going to lie, sometimes daunting. There were points in the process of planning and executing when I just felt like I had no idea what I was doing, scrambling to get on the same page as everyone else, as is the case in a lot of new environments. And at times, all I could do was channel this little dog who is literally me. This cartoon of the dog says, I am brave even when I feel scared because I know I am capable of great things. But I'm grateful that I was able to participate because in a lot of ways it did set the tone for me going forward in my role at SJSU. I'm especially grateful to my colleagues, Adriana Poe and Don Hackman, our two health science librarians who spearheaded this project and brought me on board and are now graciously letting me talk about it. Programs like this are a really dynamic way of letting new librarians get involved. Not only is it critical work in our field, but it's a great way of starting to navigate those cross-campus relationships, to develop skills for collaboration with students and faculty in your liaison department, and even just see the logistical side of what putting on a program like this in your library looks like. This hackathon was the first project I worked on at SJSU, so it was invaluable in introducing me to a lot of different levels of the library. I gained a ton of insight into higher level issues that impact our field regarding disappearing data, and the ins and outs of saving it. I learned new practical skills like working with the data, using data Lumos. I got to see the process of finding and connecting with partners in liaison departments modeled on my new campus. And even just from a standpoint of putting on workshops like this, there are so many tiny details that you don't think about until you run into them. Elements of the planning process like budgeting, who you connect with for funding, how you market your event, how you find and book a space, things that can become second nature but might feel daunting to someone who's newer to an organization, and can only really be learned by doing. So if I could provide any suggestion to mid or later career librarians, it would be that when you do have any sort of event, program, or project going on, remember to send out those invites to your newer colleagues. At best, you've gained an eager pair of helping hands, but even something as simple and low maintenance as shadowing on an existing project can be a really valuable experience. And even beyond this project, I owe so much to librarians who have been generous enough to offer their knowledge, wisdom, and collaboration. So if you've served as that mentor for someone else and you haven't heard it recently, thank you for your time and effort. And my advice to fellow new or incoming librarians would be to bug your colleagues, see what they are working on and where you might fit. This is actually a tiny bit hypocritical because Adriana and Dawn technically approached me for this project, so I didn't actually have to go bug them for this. I totally bug them on other stuff. But in general, approaching established colleagues can feel scary. You might wonder what you have to offer, especially in STEM librarianship. I think something that can be felt by a lot of us, and something that I noticed a few upcoming presenters are going to speak to, which I'm really excited to hear more about, is this idea that lacking technical expertise or a hard science background can hinder us from being effective. But in my experience, curiosity and eagerness are more than capable of closing that gap. And a lot of times our quote unquote outsider perspective can be our strength, that we bring to each other, to the departments we work with, students we work with, to the profession at large. So yeah. So that was my last slide. That was all I have for now. Thank you again for listening. I guess it seems like there's time for questions. If anyone has any questions, or even if you don't have questions now, but think of them later, my email's on the slides. Happy to connect or hear from any of you. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace, for your wonderful presentation on such a timely topic too. It sounds like it was a really wonderful event that you were able to put on. So I see that we have one question in the chat already. So we already have a publishing problem with data set links being broken. How much worse is this making that problem for people who are using scientific papers to identify data sets that they can use for their own research? What did you hear from event participants about this? I've often seen federal scientific data referred to by linking to its location in the federal data repositories.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely an issue. I think the place I've seen it the most prevalently is actually, I guess, on LibGuides. Our university is currently doing like a big audit of like broken links, and yeah, that is a lot on any LibGuide that is referencing government data. A lot of times those links don't work anymore, but yeah, definitely with I can imagine that would be even harder with something that you can't just go in and edit, like a published paper. So yeah, I do not have a solution to that. Fortunately, I think what we're doing with LibGuides is just replacing the broken links with links to Internet Archive, and related like repositories of saved or rescued data. So I think probably, I guess, just like raising awareness is a big component of it. So even if there is like an existing document that can't necessarily be easily changed, if people just know, like in their back pocket, like, okay, I see a government related link, it's not working, my first instinct is going to be to go to one of these other repositories, then hopefully that can divert or reroute the problem. But yeah, it's definitely, those links are a big issue.
I see we have another question. What was your planning timeline? How early did you start planning and advertising before you hosted the event?
So our timeline was, so our university marketing calendar, we try to stay in line with that to get like big events out to the entire campus and kind of like the beginning of semester communications. So I think we knew that there was going to be like kind of a slate of National Public Health Week programming. So that kind of like went out in January, so like 4-ish months before the event. But then I don't think at that point we didn't know that we were like doing a hackathon. Literally, it was just kind of like, oh, there will, like, stay tuned for more programming connected to National Public Health Week. We, for the actual hackathon, we took about a month to work on and plan it. So yeah, from like early March was about our timeline for that specific event as part of the larger slate of events.
And I'm not seeing any other questions at this moment, but we can give folks a little bit more time. So if anyone does have a question, you can either type that in the chat, or if you prefer to say your question verbally, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom and we will call on you. Great question here. What's next?
Oh, for me, oh my
Yes.
God, I'm so sorry. I was like, oh, like in the conference. That makes more sense. Sorry about that.
You with this project.
Good question. Yeah, so I think, like I was kind of mentioning earlier, the hackathon model, like, because government data touches across so many spheres and like connects to so many different departments, there's like a lot of opportunities within other, like this one was specifically kind of oriented around public health. But so that was kind of when I was first starting at this university. So I was kind of working off of pre-established connections between our health sciences librarians and their liaison departments. But since then, I've been working on building up my own departmental relationships with some of my science departments. So I think I've been identifying or trying to identify places where I could kind of copy paste a similar event, but with a slightly different spin. So I think I've built up some pretty good relationships in our biology department, which of course they're really interested in health data that connects into like medical, biomedical, which is one of the big issues with this. So I think I might be trying to set something up with them. As well as I was pretty involved with our banned books week. We weren't able to pull something off for that this last week, but I'm really going to try to work it in next year. And yeah, I'm not an engineering librarian, but I think some of their departments have an interest in kind of like civic data. So might try to poke at our engineering librarians and see if they want to work with me too. So yeah.
We have another question. So you mentioned that you don't have a background in the subject area. Can we ask what your background is in? And do you find ways to leverage that in your current job?
Yes. So yeah, my curve into STEM librarianship was half accidental, I guess. My undergraduate BA is in history, so very much not STEM. And then my pivot kind of happened when I mentioned previously, I taught with the digital humanities department at UCLA while I was in grad school. That was like totally on accident, but I ended up really loving it. And digital humanities is just by nature very interdisciplinary. I was able to kind of graph to it because it had a lot of social science methodology behind it. But like they're coding, they're doing all kinds of like, you know, STEM intensive things. So I think I was able to kind of leverage that to be marketable. But I think what it mostly taught me is that the most marketable thing you can be sometimes is interdisciplinary. I think especially in librarianship, like no matter what we liaise to, it's out of a foundational set of skills. And something I always say is that with my STEM students, like they're getting STEM instruction from their professors. And like, yes, we should be able to tailor to them and the specific needs and challenges they have as STEM students. But like interfacing with the library might be some of the only points in their STEM journeys in college, depending on how many GEs they are or aren't taking, that they're like really working with someone who is not just like a biology professor or an engineering professor or whatever they're in. So I always say that like, you know, I'm tailoring it to STEM, but I'm trying to get them to, you know, think beyond the scope of their discipline, to kind of develop like flexible critical thinking skills that can sometimes be hard to find in STEM departments. So yeah, that is kind of how I've always spun it or marketed myself.
Okay, I'll pause for another moment here to see if there are any additional questions. And once again, if you prefer to verbalize your question, you can use the raise hand feature. Not seeing any other questions, I think that this can conclude our keynote. So thank you again so much, Grace, for your wonderful presentation and for sharing all of your experiences with us today. So up next, we have a break until 12:25 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will resume the conference with a set of 3 lightning talks. So see you all in about 25 minutes. So our next lightning talk is from Scotty Capel, a scholarly communications librarian at Western Carolina University, and Krista Schmidt, who is a STEM librarian also at Western Carolina University. So I see you're sharing your screen already, so take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. My name is Scotty Capel. I'm the scholarly communications librarian at Western Carolina University, as Elizabeth introduced. And I'm here with my co-presenter, Krista Schmidt, who is our STEM librarian. Today, we are presenting periodic tables and permissions, copyright education for chemistry students.
To provide some background, I regularly meet with a chemistry research seminar class that includes graduate students and upper-level undergraduates. Generally, I'm asked to focus on helping students find primary articles using our databases and journals, but this time the professor asked me to pivot to something different. He noted how much graduate students reprinted figures and data from other resources in their theses without appropriate credit or permissions. So we decided to work with students on data, both finding it and using it ethically through fair use. Scotty and I collaborated, Scotty with expertise on copyright and fair use, and then with me and my subject expertise to co-teach a 2-hour class. Excuse me. So both Scotty and I have enough experience with one-shot instruction to recognize engaging students on more complex topics is often difficult. We were particularly concerned with the fair use and copyright aspect of this. Teaching these can pose a bit of a dilemma because how do you appropriately address a topic, providing the nuance and context for students to develop a better understanding without overwhelming them? Additionally, we really wanted them to recognize that fair use is not a blanket permission to use whatever they find, however they'd like, and that being a student does not exempt them from the law. And then finally, we wanted them to connect all of the conceptual things, including all of that nuance, to their own works in progress. Before I describe our solution, it's just important to know that our information literacy classes at Hunter Library are generally active learning. So we structured our class as an active learning class, and it was not difficult to do that for finding data, which was the first part of our class. But the fair use activity was a little harder until the idea of structuring it as a peer review activity surfaced. So why a peer review activity? It came down to allowing students to develop a better understanding of just how fair use and copyright applies to their own work. We felt like our idea was going to reinforce the concepts through application, and it was an immediate practical engagement of those concepts. So how did we do it? The activity that we came up with asked them to review past student work that Scotty and I found in the institutional repository from a variety of disciplines. So it wasn't just chemistry, and it was their true peers, not professionals, but true peers that they were reviewing. So the things they looked at included theses, posters, papers, etc. We developed guiding questions for them to answer, and then they had to present the class with a brief description of their findings at the end using those guiding questions and what they had learned during our discussions.
So as Krista mentioned, we were fortunate to have a couple hours with the students, and we were able to accomplish quite a bit in this time. We divided our session into 3 phases. In the first, Krista worked with the students on advanced search functions to find data and visualizations in original research articles. This ended up being pretty straightforward. The students caught on quickly and were able to call upon research skills they developed in their time at Western. From there, we transitioned into a discussion of reusing data and other information, which I led. This included an overview of copyright, fair use, and permissions, and a discussion of the ethical and legal dimensions of using copyrighted content created by others. For students who crave clear solutions to problems, the ambiguity of copyright can be vexing. To give our students an opportunity to grapple with those complexities, we then moved into the peer review activity so students could practice applying the concepts we introduced to real-world research products. The questions we asked the students to answer required them to look at the visuals within the work. These visuals included data visualizations, photographs, and illustrations. Students were asked whether they could identify if the visuals were created by the author or borrowed. If they were borrowed, did the author provide accurate and complete citations, and did they provide any indication that they had received permission to reuse those visuals? And finally, what advice regarding the use of visuals would the students give to the author of the work? This final question proved to be especially productive. Krista and I went into the session feeling very optimistic about our plan and the potential for student engagement, but I think we were both kind of blown away and pleasantly surprised by just how successful it was. The students were deeply engaged in the peer review activity. As we circulated the room, we heard a lot of great conversations within the groups, and each group was eager to engage with us as well. The students had lots of suggestions for the research product authors and lots of opinions about what they would have done differently and better. And these suggestions and opinions were informed by what they had learned about copyright and fair use earlier in the session, and that were reinforced by Krista and me in our conversation with students during the activity. So in short, they were able to see themselves in the role of the author and to wrestle with the ethical and legal complexities of using copyrighted content created by others.
1 minute.
So to sort of sum up, we were really excited and happy how students demonstrated a better understanding and appreciation of copyright. It just went so well. And we have a few ideas for how we plan to restructure this session the next time that we teach it, just a few little tweaks we'd like to make. Well, definitely that peer review was super important and we will keep working on that. And we hope to expand it to some other departments and some other programs that have graduate studies. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Krista and Scotty, and all of our Lightning Talk presenters. We are slightly behind schedule, so I will ask folks to do any Q&A stuff in the chat so that we have time to move into our next event of the day. So up next, we have our sponsor talks. We are so appreciative of all of our sponsors that make it possible for us to make this conference affordable while still providing honoraria for keynote speakers and live captioning during the conference. So in today's sponsor talk session, we will be hearing from Ray Lambert and Kelly Andrus from Project Euclid. They'll have about 10 minutes to present, including time for audience questions. So Ray and Kelly, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and let us know all about Project Euclid.
Will do. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm going to share now. Right. Yeah, everyone, my name is Ray Lambert, and I am the Publishing Services Manager at Duke University Press. As Elizabeth said, I'm joined today by my colleague, Kelly Andrus, the Publishing Technology Manager at DUP and Project Euclid. We're very grateful to Elizabeth, Jenny, Laura, and the entire planning committee for offering us this opportunity to talk to you briefly today about what we have been doing recently at Project Euclid to address accessibility. Kelly and I are the primary contacts at Duke University Press on matters related to the publishing services that we offer through Project Euclid. So that's particularly the hosting services that we offer. And we may have already been in touch with some of you about accessibility recently. Several libraries have reached out to us in the last several weeks and to our partner publishers with questions about the accessibility of Project Euclid's platform and the content that we host. So I think the slide showing now, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I should have mentioned that.
Yes, we see your
You
title
see
slide
those?
now.
Okay, great, great. Just for some brief background information about Project Euclid and what we do. The initiative was originally developed and deployed at Cornell University Library and was co-managed by Cornell and Duke University Press for several years. It was just a few years ago in 2022 that the management of the initiative moved solely to Duke University Press. Project Euclid hosts scholarly research content in the mathematical sciences on behalf of independent and society publishers. Some partners manage their own subscriptions and access to their publications, and some publish fully open access content, which we're proud to host. And we also manage Euclid Prime, a subscription-based collection with a 5-year moving wall for open access, through which publishing partners receive annual royalties. Project Euclid's mission continues to be to support broad, sustainable access to this scholarship, and we are committed to ensuring that all users, regardless of ability, can access digital content on our website. But that is a challenge given the nature of the content that we host at Project Euclid, but we are committed to being transparent about the accessibility of our platform and the content hosted there. Two key recent developments have required us to ramp up our efforts around accessibility. The first was the European Accessibility Act that went into effect last year, and the other is the forthcoming update to the Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, since Project Euclid does not create or own the content that is hosted on the platform, we are engaging partners so that we all have a clear understanding of our shared roles and responsibilities for ensuring accessibility and meeting the requirements of those specific legislative acts. And in addition to being transparent with our publishing partners and with librarians about our plans and technology roadmap, we are advocating for the adoption of accessible publishing practices by our partners. And Kelly will talk a little bit more about some of those specific efforts. So, Kelly.
Thank you, Ray. If we could go to the next slide. In response to the European Accessibility Act and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Duke University Press established web accessibility goals for all of its commerce and content sites, working closely with the DUP team members in a joint effort to design, document, and implement accessibility-focused processes and workflows. I am responsible for upholding Project Euclid's commitment to accessibility standards. This includes overseeing regular site audits, updating VPATs accordingly, and most importantly, working to remediate issues and communicating resolution. Here we'll see Project Euclid's roles and responsibilities as a host for content in the mathematical sciences published by various partner publishers. Project Euclid assumes responsibility for providing platform services and adhering to high standards. To fulfill obligations to both our partner publishers and their subscribing institutions, we are engaged in the evolving accessibility regulations, and in response, we're defining best practices. In recent months, projecteuclid.org has undergone extensive testing and accessibility audits. In collaboration with our partner vendor, SPIE, and with the support of Duke University, the site is assessed using tools such as ObservePoint, Wave, DQ, Dev tools, and we also undergo manual accessibility testing with keyboard navigation and screen reader software. All findings that are discovered and require remediation are documented and added to our roadmap. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So each scan and assessment that is made available to Project Euclid is thoroughly reviewed, and any new findings are added to our roadmap. Existing and potential subscribing institutions are encouraged to submit inquiries through the DUP-managed digital accessibility feedback form, which is available under the accessibility topic in Euclid's online help center. The proper team members are alerted and responses are prepared by Project Euclid and DUP's customer and library relations staff. Communicating transparently is key and strengthens our relationships with both our partner publishers and their subscribers. If we could go on to the next slide. While Duke University Press ensures that projecteuclid.org supports WCAG 2.1 Level 2 standards and the website accessibility guidelines of Section 508 of the U.S. Rehabilitation Act, each partner publisher is responsible for the accessibility of the scholarly content they publish to the site. Project Euclid sent an accessibility-focused letter to our partners, emphasizing the importance of accessibility guidelines, stating our commitment, defining our roles, and providing support and resources. Any questions regarding accessibility of PDF files, alt text, captions, data tables, content segments, and the structure are to be addressed to Euclid's partner publishers. Adopting a full text HTML display for published content is a widely recognized practice for meeting accessibility standards. This is a new feature available on the Project Euclid in 2025, and our partner publishers are encouraged to make the content available with accessible and with an in-browser display. If we can move on to the next slide. Duke University Press adopted this feature, beginning with content published in 2025 with this volume year. We invite subscribers of Duke Mathematical Journal, Illinois Journal of Mathematics, Kyoto Journal of Mathematics, and Notre Dame Journal of Formal Logic to engage with this display. Project Euclid acknowledges that providing full text HTML display as a platform feature may just be a first step. We are studying what it may take to incorporate full text HTML conversion into Project Euclid's services available for partner publishers. And next slide. We just want to thank you for your time and your attention, and we'd love to answer any questions at this point if there are any.
Thanks so much, Ray and Kelly. I don't see any questions so far. So if anyone does have a question, you can stick that in the chat or use the raised hand feature and we will call on you.
Right. Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we can move into our break now. So thank you again, Raymond and Kelly, for telling us all about the accessibility work that you've been doing at Project Euclid.
Thank you.
So,
feel free to reach out to us. Take care.
So now we have a break until 1:20 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will return with another set of lightning talks. So see you all in about 20 minutes.
Talk is going to be from Laura Wilson, who is a science librarian at College of the Holy Cross. And they will be talking about Still in the Stacks, reading print journals in the digital age. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. I just want to verify, can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Laura Wilson. My pronouns are she, her. I am the science librarian at College of the Holy Cross. I've been here since 2021. And I'm talking to you today about a project we did in the O'Callahan Science Library. We are one of 3 libraries on campus. We have a student population of roughly 3,000. In the first picture on my slide here, you can see the front of the library, which is a very popular study space with the students. It's quite aesthetically pleasing. And the second picture on this slide shows the back half of my library, which is mainly journal and serial storage. And one thing I'm emphasizing in this picture are our old compact shelving shelves, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. There's not much room for student study space here, and that's one thing that we had wanted to address for quite a while. So problems in the back half of my library where the journals are stored is that in our compact shelving, half of it was broken in several ways. Shelves would drift on their own. There were no brakes for shelves once they were in motion, and the few of the shelves wobbled heavily when they were moved. They would wobble so hard that books would fall off. I called a shelving company and they were unable to do any repairs because of the age of the shelving. So we banned every patron from entering the compact shelving and only library staff were allowed to enter. To protect our safety, in this image, you can see a 2x4 that I had the campus carpentry department create, which we would put to prop the shelves apart to make sure nobody got squished. In this journal collection, we also had findability issues where runs of journals were separated across open and compact shelves. Some things were out of order alphabetically, and there were incomplete, incorrect catalog records. So we had a lot of questions about what it was exactly we have in our collection. So ultimately, we came up with a project with the goal of getting rid of the unsafe compact shelving, reorganizing the collection where everything was in alphabetical order, and adding more student study space into this area of the library. So step 1, we did a full physical inventory of every volume of journal and print serial. And it took us about a year to do this, as well as clean up all of the catalog records associated with these items. Step 2, we made decisions on what to weed. And so for this, we went after low-hanging fruit, and we decided to weed all journals that we purchased permanent access through JSTOR and the American Chemical Society, which equaled out to about 18,500 volumes. The next step, which made me nervous, which connects with this nervous puppy on my slide, is informing the faculty. But we went about it in a very transparent way. We created a spreadsheet of all the titles we intended to weed, included all the information about what we had in print versus online, and included links to our online holdings so they could check for themselves. We asked the faculty to give us their thoughts and feedback and gave them 4 months to do so. We did have a few concerned faculty members, but we emphasized the fact that the shelving is dangerous. We're trying to get rid of it and add in student study space. And ultimately, all faculty were supportive of those ideas. So we decided to go ahead with our project. In the summer, we tipped all of the volumes that we intended to weed and stamped those volumes with discard so they wouldn't come back into the library somehow. And then one surprising roadblock we ran into was the issue of sustainable disposal. We work with a book disposal company regularly for our monograph discards, but they refuse to take journals because they're hardcover and the paper is a little bit different than standard monograph paper, and they were not able to pulp or resell the titles, so they wouldn't take them. We contacted a paper recycler. They were willing to take these off our hands, but they wanted to charge us $1,000 per ton. And we estimated that these journals that we were weeding weighed 40 to 45 tons, so it'd be quite costly. We contacted campus facilities and our Office of Sustainability, and they didn't have any answers for us. So we had been planning to send these to a landfill, and we felt awful about it. But 1 month before we started our process of weeding in the summer, facilities came through and they actually signed a contract with a brand new waste management company for the entire campus. I think they had other complaints about our old company, but I think this was part of their issue of how can we help. So our new waste management company offered more recycling options, and they were able to take these off our hands and recycle them. They charge us $1,000 per large dumpster, which you can see on the second image on my slide here. And we ended up needing 4 dumpsters, so it was much more cost effective than the other paper recycler that we were looking at. So we ended up with a new multi-purpose space where the broken compact shelving was. You can see an image here of a faculty member giving a presentation about coral. And when this space is not our new event space, we have tables here where students can work together collaboratively. So I had a few lessons learned from my journal weeding experience. The first is that sustainable disposable is quite difficult in this day and age. This is not something that I had been expecting. Also, good communication equals cooperative faculty. So the transparency and constant communication with them paid off, and they were supportive of the project. And I also learned that regular stacks maintenance is necessary because as we were moving and shifting things, we ran into issues of finding lost journals behind stacks, also lost or forgotten food that had been there for quite a while. We found some mold on some journals and copious amounts of dust as well. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next lightning talk. That is going to be Abigail Gobin, who is a professor and data management librarian at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And they will be doing their talk, Call Me Re-Identified. Go ahead, Abigail.
All right, good morning. Usual quick question. That slides are visible, yes? Fantastic, thank you. All right, good morning. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces in the audience. And for those of you I haven't met, I'm Abigail Gobin. I'm a professor and the data management librarian at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where it is incredibly gray and dreary today. And this is Call Me Re-Identified. So something if you are on listservs the way that I am, you will notice that we get a lot of surveys. There are a lot of library surveys floating around. And something that started bothering me, or something that I started paying attention to, is how many of them said we were anonymous, right? Or we were all de-identified in the survey. And yet these surveys were asking a lot of demographic questions. And so I wanted to kind of just check and see what was the trends, what was I finding if I started collecting survey instruments. So we'll talk about my data set overview, a little bit of the findings, and thinking about re-identifiability. And a lot where I was coming from with this was building off of the work done by Dr. LaTanya Sweeney, specifically around K-anonymity, where she talks about in this concept of how you can re-identify someone in a specific known group. So for the body of librarians, how easy is it to re-identify me or to re-identify you? And so this is where I began this particular project. What we have so far, I have coded so far 35 surveys that have been fielded on library listservs from July 23 to November 25. A couple of these are actually still live and being fielded at present. The predominant place that I've found these was ALA Connect. So people are always sending surveys to various listservs there, but this comes from a Twitter, Instagram, wherever I found a library survey, I was trying to capture that and capture the PDF. And then I coded these for, did they mention that you would be anonymous or de-identified in the data set? What were the types of demographic questions being asked and how often do we see that? And were questions clearly marked? Did we know what was required and where were the demographic questions? So what was in the informed consent? Well, over half, 14, said that we would be entirely anonymous. And I think we all need to probably rework on that definition together. In the informed consent, other ones said neither, right? Neither anonymous nor de-identified. So we saw that listed as well. 5 additional ones said you would be de-identified. And then one, it was a very blank. It's blank in my data set. I need to go back to that one more time. I just remember looking at it and being like, this is weird. So there's always some weird stuff as you're coding. The most frequent demographic question that was asked was library type. Is this an academic, public, government, that kind of thing? And that does start to re-identify people. So it was something I really wanted to track. But you can see other things, Carnegie classification, geographic region, whether that was in the United States, if it was, what state were you in, age range, that's usually 5-year ranges. Race standard means kind of that standard list that we're used to seeing, right? White, Black, Asian American. These are all of the typical demographic questions that I coded. I'd written out the ones that I thought were going to happen, and then after about 10 or 12, I had kind of this full list. And these show up on at least 2 or 3 surveys all the way through, but that up to 18. So there is a ton of variety of demographic questions that are asked, including things like your exact age, and are you a supervisor, and do you have this mental health condition? On average, 4 to 6, right? 4 to 6 demographic questions, which were asked, but you can see 7 to 9, there were 6 of them, 10 to over 7 different surveys asked 10 to 12 demographic questions. And each time you ask an additional demographic question, you get a lot closer to being able to re-identify any one of us. These were a few others that I didn't code specifically because they kind of showed up periodically. Part-time, full-time, your exact job title, which I don't know about you, that's highly re-identifiable for me. Are you affiliated with an association like AHIP if you're a medical library? Parents' highest degree, that showed up in one. That one was kind of strange. Household income, not sure why they needed that. The highest number of demographic questions was a mental health survey, and it had 18 demographic questions. I believe they also asserted anonymity. Can you skip these questions? 82.8% of the surveys that I've coded so far, you can't tell whether questions are skippable or not. I would find out as I was taking the survey. Also, someone in this room has probably gone, you got an answer that said, delete this row. Someone's testing your survey. Hi, that's me. And then 62% of the surveys did all the demographic questions first out the gate, which is not good survey practice. So why do I worry about this, right? What does this matter and what does this look like? Well, when we're re-identifying people, this is how easy it is from these demographics to re-identify me. I'm in an academic library, 15 years of experience in this job. I'm at an R1. I'm at one of 2 public R1s in Illinois. So if you know my state, you know where I am. Thank you. I'm the data management librarian. You can go from really broad to really narrow, very specifically. And this is a much bigger problem when we get into people like Dean Ballard-Thrower, who's my dean, or our past president, Leo Lowe, who have very specific ethnic and race demographics. This becomes a bigger problem with our journals who are increasingly required data sharing. And so here's what I need you to do. Think about if you're doing a survey, what do you actually need? Are these categories meaningful? Put your demographics at the end and please make them clearly optional. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Abigail. We will go to our next talk, and I will be sharing the slides for Valerie. Let me get that going. Okay.
Just a second.
Okay. Next, we will have Valerie Perry, who is a STEM librarian at the University of Kentucky, and her talk will be a new liaison model. Are you ready, Valerie? If
Yes,
so, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Valerie Perry, STEM librarian at the University of Kentucky, and today I will share my experiences about our new liaison model implemented during fall 2023. I put the URLs in the chat and they're on the slide. Next. The former liaison structure was based on physical campus library locations and hierarchy, not necessarily related to liaison work. It was unchanged for decades, despite additions of new disciplines and programs, yielded inconsistent expectations for librarians' daily work and faculty evaluations, provided poor communication to and from liaisons, offered minimal collaboration between liaisons, and duplicated efforts since liaisons worked independently. In planning the new liaison structure, all liaisons were invited to participate in a year-long process, which was led by the Associate Dean for Instruction, Outreach, Engagement, and Collections. We had many healthy and occasionally heated discussions, but eventually we agreed on public service values for liaisons, developed core categories and competencies to focus our work, created a team structure with broad subject teams where each subject team appoints a facilitator who serves 1 to 2 years and represents the team on a leadership team led by the liaison coordinator. And we implemented the new model throughout the library system and planned for annual feedback to modify the model as needed. Next slide, please. Our new core categories of work included outreach and engagement, research services, scholarly communications, and teaching and learning. Note, we no longer have significant collection duties, but each team does have a representative on the Collection Advisory Committee. Our current subject teams include health sciences, humanities, fine arts and design, social sciences, and STEM. Next slide. The current STEM team consists of 4 STEM librarians who support the following disciplines: College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, College of Engineering, and several non-health STEM departments, biology, chemistry, earth and environmental sciences, mathematics, physics and astronomy, and statistics. Next, please. For UK Library successes, we have improved communication within and between teams because of the new team structure, regular team meetings, and information shared by team facilitators and the liaison coordinator. Provided consistent expectations for our daily work and for the evaluation process. Significantly reduced collection-focused responsibilities, which allows more time for other duties. No more silos, even though team members may be located in different buildings or have different supervisors. Practical successes for the STEM team include shared workloads. This is especially true in instruction and outreach. Easier substitutions. Since we know more about what each of us is doing, it's become easier to step in when someone's absent unexpectedly, as well as subbing for longer periods of time, such as a medical leave. Our team frequently shares instruction and outreach materials, as well as brainstorming together, so there is less duplication of effort and more collaboration within our team and with others, so we become more efficient and can explore new ideas. We no longer feel isolated in our daily work. Next. We have adapted the model along the way. In the first year, the humanities team and the fine arts and design team decided they would work more effectively together as a combined team. In the first year, we recognized that the agricultural disciplines fit more closely with the STEM team instead of the health sciences team. Originally, most teams met weekly, now are monthly or whatever frequency is best for the season. On the original STEM team, 1 of 4 liaisons had full-time liaison duties due to other responsibilities. After reviewing team makeup and roles, now 3 of 4 liaisons have full-time liaison duties, and only 1 has less than full-time liaison duties. And all core categories have been added to relevant official documents, including distribution of effort forms describing our daily work, plans, and upcoming evaluations. Next slide. Some of the new opportunities the STEM team experienced are increased outreach activities. Our statistics have more than doubled in the new model, which has led to an improved campus presence, and the invitations keep coming in. Inter-team collaborations. One example, the STEM team supported the social sciences team for the past 2 summers by assisting with the heavy workload of individual consultations with all of the social work doctoral students and developing a new training module in Canvas. Since the collection team is now handling all the routine collection decisions, we can focus on some of the exciting initiatives, such as spreading news about affordable textbook programs and securing volunteer research faculty for a pilot collection gap analysis project, and improve job satisfaction. Our jobs have become more enjoyable since we are sharing the workload and we are experiencing more successes. Last slide. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions at Valerie Perry, STEM librarian at vperry@uky.edu. You'll find the presentation documents at the links. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Okay, and now we'll move on to our last lightning talk in this block. We are going to hear from Ashley Orhek Rossi, who will be talking about melting the ice. So go ahead whenever you're ready, Ashley.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, I'm Ashley Orhek Rossi. I'm STEM librarian at Western Kentucky University, which is in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I'm excited to share about my experiences planning Love Data Week 2026 because it's going to be the biggest and best one yet. One of the primary reasons I took on this endeavor was to find an alternative way to outreach and engage with my liaison areas, which are the pretty much all of the science and math disciplines at Western Kentucky University. And another reason was so I could try and gain some leadership experience with a major project. So this is an interdepartmental collaboration, and the primary stakeholders are the university libraries and the campus's Applied Center for Data Science. The libraries usually host the Love Data Week, and then the Applied Center for Data Science hosts this event called Data Science Day, which I'll explain a little bit later. So most of us are familiar with Love Data Week, the annual international week-long event sponsored by ICPSR to demystify data and make it more approachable. Libraries and institutions have the freedom to host data-related activities throughout the week of Valentine's Day every year, which is around the second full week of February. WKU libraries had never hosted Love Data Week prior to my arrival, so I started at WKU in about 2022. And I was given the freedom to plan out the first iteration of Love Data Week in 2024. I recruited some librarians to host citation management and data literacy workshops. One librarian was the puzzle and coloring page master of the week, and circulation oversaw a candy guessing jar. I authored an interactive question on our whiteboard in the comments, updating it daily, and the social media person scheduled daily interactive posts about Love Data Week. Unfortunately, attendance was light to none at the workshops and social media engagement was limited, but the students really loved engaging with the daily whiteboard question, the puzzles, coloring pages, and the candy guessing. In 2025, I kind of scrambled and threw together Love Data Week quickly in January because I had just returned from parental leave. So thankfully, I had my 2024 template to go off of. I recruited all the same people for all of the same events, adding one new workshop about the university archives, which unfortunately was just a party of one, me. The results were the exact same as 2024, which was a little frustrating and disheartening. So I was back to the drawing board for 2026. Back to Data Science Day, in 2021, the Applied Center for Data Science introduced Data Science Day, which is a one-day conference-style event to show how much data science work is taking place on campus, and it became the primary event for the Applied Center for Data Science. As the years progressed, they gradually expanded their audience and speaker reach. 2025 speakers included people from Oak Ridge National Lab and Bath & Body Works. This event's usually held in April around the same time as WKU's annual Student Research Showcase Conference, which gives students an additional opportunity to present their research. I think the audience reach for Data Science Day in 2025 was about 50 to 60 overall, and I attended some of the sessions in both 2024 and 2025 out of curiosity. So during this year's Data Science Day, a lightning struck me. I got this bright idea to connect with the Data Science Day organizer, who is a math professor and the director of the Applied Center for Data Science, to encourage him to host Data Science Day during Love Data Week. My reasons were, one, it would move Data Science Day into a more centralized location on campus, and two, it would give students a chance to practice their presentations prior to the annual Student Research Showcase. One of my underlying reasons was to foster an interdepartmental connection between the libraries and the math department, or the Applied Center for Data Science in this case, because I originally thought the math department sponsored Data Science Day. The libraries currently have a weird status on campus for reasons beyond my institutional knowledge and timeline. So this endeavor would create an example for other campus departments to collaborate with the libraries on future events and activities. I want to emphasize this was a big risk I took because no one else had ever tried an outreach project on this scale. And I desired to bring this challenge to life. So with a little bit of faith, trust, and pixie dust, I got the green light, and Data Science Day would be the culminating event for Love Data Week in 2026, taking place in the libraries. I was, and I'm super excited to make this fusion come to life. I still pinch myself because I didn't think I'd ever get the approval I desired for this project, but that's what the pixie dust is for. So the libraries and the Applied Center for Data Science are co-hosting and co-sponsoring this one-day conference, and we got a third stakeholder involved with co-hosting. The WKU's Innovation Campus is a new contributing party this year because they got involved with the 2025 Data Science Day and wanted to continue helping. The Innovation Campus is a regional hub that connects students, faculty, and industry to drive innovation, research, and economic growth, which also offers a potentially major connection with an influential campus entity. The stakes are high and encompass pretty much every level of the university, all the way up to the president. Everyone at WKU is impacted by data in some aspect. Also, these stakes involve entities external to WKU too, the industry professionals, who can do so much for supporting student success in preparing them for career readiness. So where are we now? As this ice melts, we made significant progress already. Our team is still in the beginning stages of planning, determining logistics, communication plans, and potential sponsorship opportunities. We're working on planning a resource fair that is primarily tabled by entities and businesses affiliated with the Innovation Campus. I'm enlisting other library employees to facilitate the same and maybe some new Love Data Week activities. My one co-lead is going to try and enlist Science College faculty to facilitate an activity or participate in Data Science Day. I just sent out a call for proposals actually this morning, so we're just waiting to hear back for people. So I would informally invite everyone to check out Data Science Day this year, but I don't want to go too big just yet. So we're just keeping it at our little campus level locally for now. I hope to report back in a year or so for how this endeavor went and if I melted any more ice on any interdepartmental collaborations at WKU. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ashley, right on time. So we have a couple minutes if anybody would like to ask a question of any of our lightning talk speakers. I know there has been a lot of discussion already happening in the chat. So Nancy, do we have any questions that we could pull out real quick?
Hey, it looks like a lot of the questions are being answered in the chat. But it has been some really great discussion and yeah, great presentations. So far, I'm so excited for this first day of our conference.
Yeah. No, this has been great. All of our talks so far, amazing. So I guess we'll go ahead to keep on schedule. We can move on to our next event. Thank you to all of our Lightning Talk presenters. Feel free to keep responding in the chat or in our Discord. But yeah, I think I'm handing it off to Nancy next.
15-minute presentations followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. Before we get started, if there is anyone who needs captioning, you should see a CC box in the options or tools section of your Zoom window. If there's anyone who needs captioning and does not have that available, please reach out to me or Elizabeth or Carolyn, and we can try to help you get that going. So again, this session is short talks, and our first up are Hannah Cabullo and Stephanie Sparrow. And you're going to have 15 minutes for presentation, then we'll have 5 minutes for Q&A. Presenters, I will give you a verbal warning when you have 1 minute remaining, and then I'll let you know when your time has elapsed. And when that happens, please wrap up your thoughts so we can move to the Q&A. Hannah and Stephanie, are you ready?
I believe so. Is everyone seeing our slides?
I see them, so please go ahead.
Perfect. So this is Hallucinated, Fabricated, or Confabulated, a work in progress scope presentation of a hallucinated citation scoping review. I am Hannah Cabulio, and I am the engineering librarian at University of Minnesota. And I'll let Stephanie introduce herself.
And I'm Stephanie Sparrow, and I am in Extension and Social Sciences librarian at the University of Minnesota.
All right, so I think Stephanie is going to stick the link in the chat if you want to follow along with the slides. We have a whole handful of other research collaborators across departments here, some from the social sciences, some in our health sciences library, Amy Riegelman, Molly Blake, Nicole Tiesmahan, Brooke Olson, and Lillian Brinkman from UND. So with evidence synthesis, definitions are important. And so just for background information, we want to define what do we mean by hallucinated citation for the purposes of our scoping review. We mean a reference source generated by a generative AI chatbot responding to user prompts that does not actually exist. And there are many different names that are being used for hallucinated citations, and we're going to get into that later in the presentation. And so why do these occur? Generative AI chatbots are probabilistic. It's giving you a likely series of characters, not pulling answers from a database, as probably all of us know at this point. So in response to the prompt, chatbots attempt to give us something plausible. And so it looks like a real citation, might have real authors, real journal titles, but it may not be something that author actually wrote, or the DOI might go to an entirely different publication. And why are hallucinated citations important? Well, because they get published as references in real things. Some high-profile cases have been legal cases, newspaper articles, government reports, and even scholarly research. So a couple of examples here, the Maha report or summer reading list in the Chicago Sun-Times that had generated fake book titles. And academia is not safe from hallucinations either. As many of us have probably found, we're being asked questions to help find references that don't exist. Scholars might be listed as authors of fake publications. They might get a ping from Google Scholar being like, hey, is this your publication? And it might be, no, that is not a paper that I ever wrote and that does not exist. And scholars are also citing fake studies in their research outputs and assignments. So how do we avoid doing this? One, of course, always verify that the citations are real. Don't use chatbots to find information resources. There are other tools that do that. But also be wary of search engines and aggregators that mine citations. If a scholar has a hallucinated citation in their reference list, Google Scholar might pick that up in the references. If you're looking at references in an article, that's going to be there. So kind of the landscape can be start being polluted by these hallucinated citations. So guidance and literature on this topic is messy and it is lacking synthesis. So that is kind of where our scoping review comes in. So a scoping review is a type of evidence synthesis. It's a review that provides a preliminary assessment of the potential size and scope of available research literature and aims to identify the nature and extent of research evidence, usually including ongoing research. And so we felt like this is a good fit with our topic as something that is emerging and has very heterogeneous literature. Our research question is, what is the state of the literature, methods, and results in investigating hallucinated citations discovered via use of Gen AI chatbots? And we have a secondary research question looking at the characteristics of studies, such as which terms are being used to describe hallucinated citations. Registering your protocol ahead of time is an important part of evidence synthesis. So we have registered our protocol on OSF. You can go check it out if you're interested to learn more about our study. This reduces bias and helps, make it more reproducible. We're saying ahead of time how we're going to conduct the study. And if we deviate from that, we need to document and explain that as well. So getting into our methodology. The research around this topic is very dispersed and diverse. Basically, all disciplines are impacted by hallucinated citations or are researching Gen AI. And so kind of in the preliminary investigations of this topic, we were finding that across disciplines, people are researching this. So that is why we looked in more than 50 databases, both subject-specific ones, general and multidisciplinary ones, and also the gray literature. with the goal being to capture all of the literature on this topic. And so some great literature examples that we want to pull in are, dissertations and theses, preprints, conference proceedings, and yes, 50 databases was a lot, but good thing we had multiple people to translate those searches. So this is a lot of text on the slide. Some of you may be interested in getting into the nitty-gritty, but this is an example of our search in APA PsycInfo on the Ovid platform. We have, a few main concepts. So kind of in lines 1 and 2 are the ideas of generative AI, LLMs, chatbots. And then in line 3, we have the idea of hallucinated citations, kind of grouping words like hallucinated, fake, fabricated, confabulated, think terms that we were seeing showing up in kind of our preliminary searching. And then near terms like study, title, citation, reference, paper. And in the databases where we could search those terms near to each other was really great, but in some of them we didn't. So that created a lot of noise. But then line 4 is kind of around the idea of searching and prompting chatbots. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
All right, so this is a screenshot from Covidence, which is the platform that we're using for screening. And so unlike your everyday literature searches, evidence synthesis requires you to look at all of your search results and then determine individually if each item fits the criteria you've set for inclusion and exclusion criteria to either put it into the next stage or to remove it entirely from your study. Citations will each go through, or citations in general, go through 2 rounds of screening, the first being title and abstract, the second being full text. So going into title and abstract screening after deduplication, we had 20,002 citations to screen. So this was, once again, a wonderful time to have a whole team of people to read that. It was a lot of reading. And so 2 people voted on each of the records that we had to decide if it was to move forward or to be removed entirely. If it was definitely about our topic or had the slight possibility to be relevant to our study, we put it into the next round for full text screening. And if it was definitely not about our topic or not relevant, we would exclude it entirely. 2 people had to agree on each record, and if there was a disagreement, there would have to be a third person to come in and vote as the conflict breaking decider of the record. So title and abstract screening, then it goes into full text screening, which is where we are currently at this stage. We have been able to do a little bit of data extraction so far. We had, I think, a total of like 2,300 some, I don't see my exact number of records that we are full text screening. So we are heavy in the weeds of full text screening currently. Next slide, please. Okay, so for preliminary findings, so far we are seeing, in fact, there's a lot of heterogeneity across studies in terms of the reporting methods and findings. It is very not surprising, unfortunately, how many articles have no reference to what prompts they use to acquire references or the sample size or even mentioning the chatbot model or date of the search. As we know, there have been many updates to some of the major generative AI models like ChatGPT, and those details are important. So this is telling us so far conducting and reporting standards are definitely needed for this. So another one of the reasons we were looking to do this was there are a lot of terms being used to describe this phenomenon. So we can see here in this word cloud, just in the few, like 15 studies we've been able to extract so far, there's not a consensus on the terminology. So far we are thinking that a Delphi study would be really helpful to come up with a standard definition as well as terminology to use for this. Next slide. So once again, confirmed, scholars across many different disciplines are interested in this topic. We're seeing a lot of health sciences and medical sciences talking about generative AI and hallucinated citations. But as we screen more and more, we are seeing that that list of disciplines is expanding. So once again, goes to show that we had to search in so many databases because there are a lot of conversations that's widely dispersed on this topic. Next slide. So these are so far, once again, the models that have been described in the articles we have extracted so far, ChatGPT being the most popular one so far. But as you can also tell, a lot of folks are not distinguishing which model they are indeed using to generate sources. Next slide, please. Okay, so of the 15 we've screened so far and have made it through full text into extraction, the authors do have some recommendations of how to potentially minimize the risk of hallucinated citations. So it was common for researchers to stress that generative AI chatbots, that their work should be double-checked. Users of these tools need to be verifying that all of their references not only exist, but also do contain the information that they say. General advice is that confabulations are intermixed with accurate information. So ChatGPT and generative AI is really good at having the authoritative tone, and references are formatted similarly. And so they are very convincing looking. And so far researchers have recommended to be very cautious and allot extra time to verify the results from a generative AI tool. Okay, there also was at least one case of a researcher recommending for publishing and scholarly communication that if ChatGPT is used in the research process, that publishers should take this very seriously and the work itself must be seriously questioned. Editors should be very concerned about ChatGPT use when they view incorrect citations. So this was specifically from one of our extracted studies. And as I said, we've only read 15 and fully extracted 15. So we're really interested to see where this goes from here. Next slide, please. And there also are some recommendations based on individual prompts that might be helping to minimize ChatGPT and generative AI returning hallucinated citations. So researchers have noted that there's some evidence showing that reinforcement learning from human feedback could be used to reduce fabrications, as well as potentially specific prompting techniques could be used to help, such as specifying a minimum number of references or even outlining very specific criteria in bullet points within the prompt of how the citations must meet that criteria. Next slide, please. So far, there have been a lot of error patterns that have been observed. All of this is things that we are continuing to add to our analysis and our notes. So many of the authors in journals listed in the fake citations were highly regarded in that field. ChatGPT provides verifiable citations more often for certain publication types like books, which at least for me makes me think of Google Books. Authors also noticed several near-matched article titles had query terms switched in to match the prompt that was put into generative AI. So in the example given here, clinical high risk for psychosis was swapped in for bipolar disorder. So you take the same title, swap in one keyword or two. Next slide. So this is where we are at now. We had to actually pause this week. We had to pause full text screening because we have gotten into a part where our familiarity, understanding, and knowledge of some of the technical concepts in particular is retrieval augmented generation, I think it is. Retrieval augmented generation, we have come to understanding that we don't understand it enough to be able to systematically apply our inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so we tomorrow will be meeting with an LLM expert to hopefully get some clarity on this, because once again, we are looking to make a study that is fully reproducible and systematic. And so we need to all agree on what is or is not included.
1 minute.
Thank you. We also will continue screening for the full text and continue data extraction before eventually writing our manuscript. So we are hoping to get this in pretty much as soon as we can. And so keep your eye out for early 2026 for our full analysis of our study and hopefully an article. We have our references, including the articles we have already analyzed and extracted data from. And thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I think this is a great conversation. And so I'm going to open the floor for questions or comments. If you want to put them in the chat, you can do that. I'm going to have some wranglers helping me with those, but if you would like to raise your virtual hand, we can get you unmuted and take you in order of your questions. So it looks like, first off, question in the chat, what are your team's plans based on the results? For example, are you considering developing training or identifying resources to support the students and researchers at your institution?
I don't think we've gotten that far yet, but kind of like one of the implications we were thinking of our studies is, of course, the work that we do with researchers and with students, but as well as like people who are doing systematic reviews. So having like guidelines as well for reporting things like hallucinated citations. So I would say not, of course, we have like here's what we think the impact will be that we have in our protocol, but we haven't thought that far ahead yet. I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I would say that we are really just like this. We have come across this issue many times personally, as well as, of course, hearing the headlines and seeing the stories and working with lots of researchers who are asking questions about generative AI and its use in literature searching. And so we it's not a fully set plan from there, but we are considering like its implications for research at our institution, as well as working with the faculty that we do work with, as well as hopefully having some suggestions for the researchers at our institution and others of how and hopefully also some feedback for the tech companies on how to actually make a product that maybe it's not constantly making things up and or getting into an endless feedback loop of I'm sorry for the fake citations. Let me create some more fake citations for you.
Okay. We have another question. Let's see, this one was answered in the chat. And so there's one more. In your example search, you had the publication set from 2018 to 2025. How did you decide to extend that back before the release of ChatGPT?
That is a good question. So we were thinking like there was the public release of ChatGPT, but also that there had been other large language models that may have been used prior to that, as well as we even thought about like, well, is 2016, like, is that too far back? And we were like, yes, even from scanning a lot of the literature, the large language models and the generative AI conversations, I guess, that were happening in the literature were functionally very different from what the current environment is with it. And so that range is hoping to catch like any very early adopters or testing of large language models that would go into generative AI chatbots, as well as hopefully reducing noise from completely irrelevant large language model chatbot research that was done before our current environment of generative AI chatbots. I hope that helps. We also have a lot smoother descriptions in our protocol for that as well. So yeah, it was a series of conversations for sure.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but lots of people are looking forward to seeing your final publication, as I'm sure you are.
We are too. A lot more work before that happens.
Yes, yes, great. We'll pause here for just a moment in case there's somebody still typing, but we have one more short talk for this session, and I'm going to go ahead and start introducing. We have Shalini Ramachandran from Loyola Marymount University, and Shalini is going to talk about leveling the lab. So are you ready?
Yes, and I'm going to share my slides.
Okay, great. Thank you. Looks good. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Shalini Ramachandran, a STEM librarian at Loyola Marymount University. So in today's presentation, I want to share research that my team conducted as part of an NSF grant on whether immersive technology can address equity gaps in chemistry lab training. So we began our initial pre-grant exploratory research by reviewing literature on STEM lab experiences for students in high school, as well as the college level. And the literature was clear on equity gaps. Students arrive at college with vastly different lab preparation. Some have extensive high school experience, others have none. And first-year chemistry is oftentimes a gatekeeper course for many STEM careers. So these barriers that we saw in the literature talked about anxiety, belonging, accessibility, preparation. So all of that was well documented in the research, and they affect underrepresented students most acutely. So the question we started with was, can immersive technology help address one or more of these? And could libraries be a way to distribute the technology? We brought together 5 institutions: Boise State University, USC, University of Southern California, Loyola Marymount University, Chapman University, and Cal State Los Angeles, each bringing something essential. So Boise State, the computer scientists and students there developed the technology. Chemistry departments at USC and Chapman ensure the lab design is authentic. At LMU, Cal State LA, and Chapman, we focused on UX testing and equity. And USC's education researchers handled the rigorous evaluation. So this was and is a collaboration with teaching faculty, librarians, graduate students, and undergrads. So all of these different perspectives and expertise enrich our work. All right, so we started by listening in terms of how we did this. We conducted interviews with students who were currently taking a first-year general chemistry lab or had taken one in the past. We talked to students about their daily routines, what their instructors do, what makes them anxious, what they hope for. Then the Boise State team designed VR modules based on that feedback. We tested it at USC with students randomly assigned to 3 groups. So the one group received the VR training, another group received web-based training, and then we had a controlled group that just worked with a worksheet, traditional worksheet. And so we measured anxiety before the training, and after the actual lab. So this research is iterative. What we learn shapes the next round of testing and refinement at our partner institutions. And this is a 3-year study. So we are in our 2nd year. We have another year to go. So as I mentioned earlier, to inform module design, we conducted semi-structured interviews with chemistry students. And there were several students offering feedback. One student told me, I never did chemistry labs in high school. We never had glassware. Everybody else seems to know what they're doing. So that comment reflected what we heard across interviews. Students needed better prep, clearer instructions, space to practice safely, and peer connection. And so many of the design features in the VR module came directly from what students told us. So here's what we found after our first round of testing in spring 2025. So right after training, before students did their real lab or in-person lab, VR students reported lower anxiety than both the web-based group and the worksheet group. So that difference was statistically significant and meaningful. Then we measured again after students completed their actual lab. The VR advantage held up against the web-based group, but against the worksheet group, the difference disappeared. Why? Probably because once all students experienced actual lab success, they all felt more confident. The worksheet group caught up through hands-on experience. So we are provided an early anxiety reduction boost in a real lab setting with good instruction. Other preparation methods eventually got students to the same place. So what builds confidence, what we see is multiple factors. Then the student interviews, as well as the randomized control trial data showed us something important. There's no single magic solution. Structured prep matters, quizzes, handouts, clear summaries. Instructor quality matters tremendously. Students could tell you exactly which instructors explain clearly versus those who don't. Peer relationships matter. And the VR, it addresses one specific piece, and it's critical as well. Low stakes practice. A lot of students ask for that, and that is what the VR provides. So these work together, and that's what the data has told us so far. All right, scaling. So the VR modules developed in our study will be free when they are released in fall 2026, when our study is complete. In the meantime, if this is something you would like to try at your own institutions, you can take our methodology, the human-centered design approach, how we assessed outcomes, and test it with there are several commercially available VR tools for chemistry, which you can utilize to experiment with. And that's a realistic way to pilot the idea. Or if you have computer science partners on campus, you could build something custom using our design as a model. So a key part to the study is demonstrating that a library circulation model can work for making the technology available to students. We partnered with USC's Science and Engineering Library to manage a headset checkout during the spring and fall 2025 semesters. So students have a 1-week window right before their first labs to check out a MetaQuest 3 headset and do the training in the library. The library staff integrated this into their normal circulation process. So all students who needed a headset were able to access one. And I think we had 176 students participating that first semester. So no one was turned away. So this shows that libraries aren't just passive distributors. We can manage emerging technology, enable access, and do it in a way that works for students' actual schedules and needs. So I guess to conclude, this work shows, what we librarians already know, that libraries can do more than circulate materials. We can research what students need, design solutions, test them rigorously, and document what works. So a core insight is that libraries are well positioned to distribute new technologies equitably. We understand access, we reach students, we can manage circulation. So when we partner with faculty and researchers, we bring a different kind of expertise to the table. So that's all I have for today. So thank you for your interest, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you so much. I'm seeing lots of reactions, so thank you. We appreciate the information. Yes, if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand and we can take you in that order. I'm not seeing any, but we may have some people still typing. And as a reminder, we do have our Discord. If you haven't gotten onto that yet, we can put the link in the chat again so that we can carry on the conversation there. I do see Natercia has a question. Was there a lot of attrition in the study?
See, by attrition, do you mean students or dropping out?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering about the students, like the participants of the studies. Thank you.
Okay, so the way we designed it is different institutions are doing different things, right? Bringing different expertise. So at USC, we integrated it into the first year chemistry labs. You know, it's randomly assigned what each of the classes gets, but they all have the option to opt out, but otherwise they're all part of the study. So that's how it's designed. So there's control group, and then there's the VR group and the web-based group. We do offer extra credit incentives, and that's always very popular. So almost everyone wanted to participate. So we haven't had that issue. And you know, we're not following them long-term either. So it's like a quick 1 week window where we are doing all the testing as well. So
thank you.
Great. The next question we have is, what brand of VR headsets did you use? And if it was Meta, were there barriers to developing the lab for VR?
Yes, we did use Meta. And in terms of barriers, you mean barriers from Meta, like restrictions from Meta?
Right. Yeah.
No, we didn't experience any thing. We just used whatever potentialities their headsets offered. No pushback from Meta. We invited them to be part of like the study. They were not interested. So yeah. But yes, we worked with Meta. That was the, I guess, most economical option as well for us in terms of the cost of the headsets and so on.
Great. We still have a few more minutes if anyone has some questions you'd like to ask now. A reminder, Elizabeth has put the Discord link in the chat if you want to carry this over into the Discord for later. We have a channel for day one, and we welcome you to share your thoughts in there as well. As a reminder, those of you who are with us, if you're still typing, I'll give you a little buffer to type. There will be another email sent out tomorrow in the morning with the Zoom link. We have a different Zoom link each day. And so check your email in the morning. That should go out, I believe, around 10 a.m. Eastern. So please be looking for that. If you don't get it, you can email our planning email address, and we can try to get you a link that way. I have one more question, and the planning email is in the chat. Thank you, Elizabeth. Natercia is asking again, was there an instructional designer involved in your study?
Yeah, I started typing an answer, but yes, no, we did not have an instructional designer, but it would have been great to have one for sure. It was just us librarians wearing all the hats in terms of doing the user testing. Yeah, no dedicated instructional designer.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Although we do have education faculty who are doing the evaluation and assessment. But yeah, no instructional designer.
Okay. Awesome. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. I want to thank all of our presenters for their time today, and everybody for coming again. Yes, thanks to our sponsors, AAAS, ACS, AMS, IEEE, IET, IOPP, Project Euclid, and SPIE. Also, I love to give a shout out to the STEM Librarians Collaborative Planning Committee. It's been a great pleasure to work with everybody this last year to get this conference put together, and we are going to take a little break, a little about what do they say, a 19-minute break. We'll come back at 3:30 or just before that for our last session of the day, which will be a storytelling session. So I hope you'll join us, enjoy your break, take some break from the screen, and we'll see you back here at 3:30. Thank you.